Please like, share, and subscribe.
Hello, my name is Christina Taylor, and I'm a paper conservator at the Strauss Center for Conservation and Technical Studies at the Harvard Art Museums. Today, I'm coming to you from my home studio, where I'll be demonstrating the color woodcut printing technique that Ernst Ludwig Kirchner used to make the print Bathers Tossing Reeds in our collection. I'm going to be making a small reproduction of this print for my demonstration. And although I'm using Kirchner as an example, these techniques can be applied to many different artists and different styles of relief prints too. In this print, Kirchner is reducing the forms of the bodies and the surrounding landscape to planes of vibrant colors. And you'll probably notice the colors he used right away: black, green, and orange. But I want to take a closer look at some details so we can see some of the subtleties of what's really going on in this print. This is a detail of the upper left corner of the print. We can see the black, green, and orange, but now we can also see a dark green and dark orange color as well. It's tempting to think that Kirchner also printed these dark green and dark orange colors, but he did not. He's employing a clever trick. Because the inks have some transparency to them, where the colored inks overlap the white paper, they appear bright and vibrant. And where they overlap the black image, they appear darker and more subdued. Because of this overlapping effect, Kirchner is able to achieve a depth and heightened sense of movement in the scene. Now we've determined that Kirchner used 3 colors to make this print. So what I have here are 3 wood blocks, one for each color we're going to be printing: black, green, and orange. I'm going to start off by carving the block for the black portion, because that's where we see the majority of the composition in this print. The black block is often referred to as a key. It's possible that Kirchner would have carved all 3 blocks before printing, but it's really much more likely that he would have carved and printed the black portion and then made color decisions from there. So I've transferred my drawing of the black image onto the block, so I have a guide as to where to carve in the next step. Kirchner worked in a very loose, expressionistic style, so it's possible that he carved directly into the block, or he was just using a rough sketch. I've also stained the block, and that's so when I go to carve, I can more easily see my progress. So what I'm going to do next is carve the block, ink it up, and start printing. Woodcuts are a type of relief print, so the areas in relief, the areas that remain uncarved, are what receive ink and print. So I'm essentially going to be carving away the background or negative space. Kirchner was a founder of Die Brücke, which was a group of artists who explored the woodcut technique and were most associated with their sharp, angular lines. There are all kinds of tools for carving, but Kirchner would have used a knife or a chisel to achieve this roughly cut look. This is what the block looks like now that I'm done carving. Next, I'm going to ink it up and print it. The ink I'm using is a black, oil-based ink, and I'm rolling it on the surface of the block with a brayer or a roller. Only the areas in relief receive ink, so anywhere I carved away will stay uninked and will not transfer to the paper during printing. And now the block is inked and ready to print. For the color printing process, registration or alignment of each color is very important. I'm using a registration system called T&bar, where marks I made on the back of the paper line up with my jig that I've added around the block during printing. There are many types of registration methods, and this is just one example. I'm adding a thin piece of paper to cut down on the friction during printing, and I'm using a wooden spoon to apply the pressure and print, but a baren or other tools could be used as well. Kirchner printed both by hand and with a press, but I'm going to be demonstrating hand printing today because that's what I think he did for this print, and I'll point out why in a little bit. I just printed these 2 and the ink is still wet. Here are the 2 blocks that we're going to use to print the green and the orange layers. What I'm going to do before the ink dries on these is transfer or offset the ink onto the blocks. So my black print, or the key, acts as a guide for where I'm going to carve the colors. I'm using the same registration system to do the transfer, so I know that everything will be lined up when I go to print the colors. Kirchner may have done something similar, but he probably was much freer and less precise with his technique. I'm taking the fresh print and laying it on the block, and then I'll apply pressure and print the same way I did before. But instead of ink going from my inky block to the paper, some of the ink from the fresh print will be transferred to the bare block so I can use it as a guide to lay out the colors. And here's the transfer. I transferred the image onto both blocks, the one that will be green and the one that will be orange. I'm going to start with the green block. I'm using a marker to draw on the block where I want green to ultimately be. The color of the marker makes no difference, but I'm using a green one so it's easier to visualize. In the image on the left, I've digitally separated the green layer to highlight where the green areas need to be. Also, you'll notice that some of these areas overlap the black image, and that's where the layering occurs and we see the dark green effect. So now I'm done laying out the green areas. You'll see it's mainly the areas surrounding the figure, with some areas overlapping the black. And I did the exact same thing with the orange. In this case, the orange area is really the interior of the figures. Now I will carve the exact same way I did for the black block. I'm carving away the negative space, leaving the areas that I've colored in relief so they can receive ink and print. And here's the finished orange block. And I'll do the same for the green block, carving around the green areas. You see I'm carving away the figures because I don't want any green printed in those areas. Now I'm done carving all the blocks and we're ready to print them together. Before we begin printing, I want to take a look at some details of Kirchner's print again, so we can get a sense of how he inked the blocks and also in which order he printed them. First, I want to look at the upper right corner. Do you see how the black area sort of tapers off and has a fuzzy edge? I think this is a result of Kirchner printing by hand. And at the top edge, he applied little to no pressure there, so ink didn't transfer evenly to the paper. If he printed on a press, there would be uniform pressure applied to the entire block, and this kind of effect wouldn't occur. If we look at another impression of the print, this one is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you can see that Kirchner made much more contact in that upper right corner, and it printed more fully. This variation between impressions can be achieved with hand printing, and Kirchner embraced this imperfection and really incorporated it as part of his image making. Returning to a detail of Harvard's impression, I also want to look at the layering of colors to determine what order Kirchner printed each block. I hope you can see from this photo that there are several places where the green ink sits very clearly on top of the black, and that the orange ink sits on top of the green. This means that the order of printing was first black, then green, and lastly orange. So what I'm going to do now is finish up our reproduction by printing all the colors together, and I'm going to be keeping in mind Kirchner's techniques as I go. So now I'm all done printing, and you can see that I've printed a number of these. Kirchner did not print large editions. In fact, sometimes he would carve a woodcut and only print one impression. Between the fact that Kirchner implemented this very loose and expressionistic style, and the fact that he didn't edition his prints, he was extremely prolific and made over 2,000 prints throughout his career. And of those, over 1,000 were woodcuts. And that breaks down to over a woodcut a week. In 1921, Kirchner wrote that there is no better place to get to know an artist than in his graphic work. So I hope this demonstration today has shed some light on the color woodcut technique, and also the ways in which Kirchner manipulated the technique to make this print. Thanks so much for watching.